The orc woman's shadow stretched long across the dirt road as the sun dipped toward the western hills, and she knew before she reached the first house that this human settlement would offer her nothing but closed doors and frightened faces. Zartha had been walking for 3 days straight, her provisions exhausted, her water skin empty since yesterday morning, and the wound in her side from the skirmish with the border patrol still seeping blood through the makeshift bandage she had fashioned from her torn tunic. She was not foolish enough to expect welcome, but desperation had driven her here anyway, to this small frontier town, nestled in a valley between the human territories and the wild lands where her clan had once roamed. The first house she approached sat at the edge of town, a modest structure with smoke rising from its chimney and the warm glow of candlelight visible through the windows. Zartha could smell bread baking, and her stomach clenched with hunger so fierce it made her dizzy. She raised her fist and knocked 3 solid raps that echoed in the quiet evening air. The sounds inside stopped immediately. She heard whispered voices, frantic and afraid, and then nothing. No one came to the door. She waited a full minute before turning away, her jaw tight, her small tusks pressing into her lower lip as she fought down the humiliation that threatened to rise in her throat. The second house was larger, better maintained, with a garden out front that showed careful tending. Zartha knocked again, and this time she heard a child's voice asking a question before being quickly shushed. The door remained closed. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of a woman pulling curtains shut, blocking out even the sight of her. At the third house, a man actually opened the door a crack, but the moment he saw her standing there, her green skin unmistakable in the fading light, her pointed ears and tusks marking her as other, as enemy, as monster, he slammed it shut so hard the frame rattled. She heard the heavy slide of a bolt being thrown. Zartha continued down the main road, past houses that seemed to shrink away from her presence. She tried to keep her movements slow and unthreatening, her hands visible and empty, but it made no difference. She was an orc in a human town, and that was all they needed to know. At one house, she did not even have a chance to knock before she heard a voice shout from inside to get away, or they would set the dogs on her. At another, someone threw a bucket of dirty water from an upper window, though whether it was aimed at her or simply unfortunate timing, she could not say. The wound in her side throbbed with each step, and she pressed her hand against it, feeling the warm wetness of fresh blood. She needed rest, needed food, needed clean water to wash the injury before infection set in. She had survived the patrol's ambush, survived 3 days of walking through rough terrain with minimal supplies, but she would not survive much longer without help. The houses grew sparser as she reached the far end of town. She had nearly given up hope entirely when she saw one last structure, set back from the road at the very end of the settlement. It was smaller than most of the others, more of a cottage really, with a vegetable garden on one side and a small barn on the other. Smoke rose from its chimney as well, and she could see lamplight glowing warm and steady through the windows. Zartha stood in the road for a long moment, gathering what remained of her strength and her pride. This would be her last attempt. If this door closed to her as well, she would turn back toward the wilderness and take her chances with whatever came next. Death, perhaps. Or a long, difficult journey to find another orc settlement that might take her in, though she was no longer certain such places existed anymore. She walked up the worn path to the cottage door and raised her fist to knock. Before her knuckles could connect with the wood, the door swung open, and she found herself face to face with a human man. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his mid-20s, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that were a striking shade of gray. He wore simple clothes, a worn linen shirt and canvas trousers, and there was dirt under his fingernails as though he had been working in the garden. He looked at her without flinching, his gaze taking in her green skin, her tusks, her pointed ears, and the blood seeping through her fingers where she pressed them to her side. "You are hurt," he said. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as though he opened his door to injured orcs every day of the week. Zartha found herself at a loss for words. She had prepared herself for rejection, for fear, for hatred even, but not for this quiet acceptance. "I am," she managed finally, her voice rough from thirst and exhaustion. "I need water, and perhaps somewhere to rest for a night. I can work for it. I am strong despite the wound." The man studied her for another moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, some decision being made. "Come inside," he said, stepping back to open the door wider. "We can talk about work later. Right now, you need that injury tended before it kills you." She hesitated on the threshold, years of distrust warring with her desperate need. "Why are you helping me?" He met her gaze steadily. "Because you knocked on my door asking for help, and I am not in the habit of turning away people who need it." He paused, then added, "My name is Quinlan Larson. This is my home, and you are welcome here as long as you need." Zartha stepped inside, and the door closed behind her, shutting out the cold evening air and the hostile town beyond. The cottage was small but clean, with a fire burning in the hearth and simple furnishings that spoke of a man who lived alone and did not require much. There was a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, shelves lined with books and jars of preserved food, and various tools and implements hanging from hooks on the walls. "Sit," Quinlan said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "Let me see the wound." She sat carefully, every movement sending fresh spikes of pain through her side. Quinlan disappeared through a door into what she assumed was another room, and returned a moment later with a basin of water, clean cloths, and a leather bag that clinked with the sound of glass bottles. "I will need to remove the bandage," he said, setting his supplies on the table. "This may hurt." "Pain and I are well acquainted," Zartha said. She moved her hand away from her side and began to unwrap the strip of fabric she had tied there 3 days ago. The cloth stuck to the wound, dried blood making it adhere to her skin, and she had to work slowly to peel it away without tearing the injury open further. When the bandage finally came free, Quinlan leaned closer to examine the wound. It was a sword cut, long and deep, running from just below her ribs to her hip. The edges were inflamed, and some infection had clearly begun to set in despite her best efforts to keep it clean. "This is from a blade," Quinlan said. "It was not a question. Yes, human soldiers 3 days ago. I was traveling through what I did not know was their patrol territory." "Did you fight them?" "Only to escape. I am not a warrior by choice, Quinlan Larson. I was a gatherer in my clan, a healer of sorts, but I can defend myself when necessary." He nodded and began to clean the wound with water and a cloth, his movements gentle but thorough. Zartha gritted her teeth against the pain, her hands gripping the edge of the chair until her knuckles turned pale green. "A healer," Quinlan said as he worked. "Then you know this needs to be properly cleaned and stitched." "Yes, I did not have the supplies or the angle to do it myself. I have thread and a needle. I have stitched wounds before, on animals mostly, but the principle is the same." He looked up at her. "Do you trust me to do this?" It was a strange question to ask, and yet she appreciated that he did. "I do not know you well enough to trust you," Zartha said honestly. "But you have already shown me more kindness than anyone else in this town, and I have little choice regardless. So yes, do what needs to be done." Quinlan retrieved a needle and thread from his bag, along with a small bottle of clear liquid that smelled sharp and medicinal when he uncorked it. "This will burn," he warned, and then he poured it directly into the wound. The pain was immediate and fierce, like fire racing along her nerves, and Zartha could not stop the low growl that escaped her throat. She forced herself to remain still, to not pull away, and after a moment the burning subsided to a more manageable throb. "The worst is over," Quinlan said. He threaded the needle with steady hands and began to stitch the wound closed, working from the bottom up. His stitches were small and neat, each one placed with care, and though it hurt, Zartha found herself impressed by his skill. "You are good at this," she said, needing something to focus on besides the pull and tug of thread through her flesh. "My father was a physician in a larger town to the south. He taught me the basics before he died. I am no expert, but I know enough to handle most common injuries." "What brought you here to this small place?" Quinlan was quiet for a moment, focused on his work. "I wanted peace," he said finally. "The town where I grew up was too crowded, too full of noise and politics, and people who cared more about appearances than substance. My father left me a small inheritance, enough to buy this cottage and some land. I grow what I need, trade for the rest, and live simply. It suits me. You not get lonely, sometimes, but I prefer loneliness to false companionship." He tied off another stitch and moved higher along the wound. "What about you? You said you were a gatherer and healer. What happened to your clan?" Zartha felt the familiar ache of loss settle over her. "They were killed or scattered. Human expansion has pushed into our territories for years now, and the conflicts have grown more frequent and more violent. My clan tried to remain neutral to avoid confrontation, but it did not matter. 3 months ago, a human army came through our lands. They burned our settlements, killed our warriors, and drove the rest of us into the wilderness. I have been wandering since then, trying to find somewhere safe, but there is nowhere left for my kind." "I am sorry," Quinlan said, and she could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "War is cruel, and it rarely distinguishes between combatants and innocents. Your people started this war." "Some of my people," he corrected gently. "Not all humans are expansionist soldiers, just as I imagine not all orcs are raiders and warriors. But you are right that the injustice falls on your kind more heavily." She appreciated that he did not make excuses or try to justify the actions of his people. They sat in silence for a while as he continued stitching. The only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft whisper of thread being pulled through skin. When he finally tied off the last stitch and cut the thread, Zartha felt a wave of relief wash over her. Quinlan applied a poultice that smelled of herbs and honey to the closed wound, then bandaged it with clean cloth, wrapping it around her torso and securing it with a knot. "There," he said, sitting back to examine his work. "Keep it clean and dry and change the bandage every day. The infection should clear up in a few days if you rest and let your body heal." "Thank you," Zartha said. The words felt inadequate for what he had done, but they were all she had. "You are welcome. Now you need food and water." Quinlan stood and moved to the shelves, gathering bread, cheese, dried meat, and a pitcher of water. He set them on the table in front of her. "Eat slowly. Your stomach will rebel if you rush after going without." Zartha did not need to be told twice. She poured water into the cup he provided and drank deeply, feeling the cool liquid soothe her parched throat. Then she tore off a piece of bread and ate it slowly, savoring each bite. The food was simple but good, and she felt strength beginning to return to her limbs. Quinlan sat across from her, watching with what seemed like satisfaction as she ate. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "I have a spare bedroll I can lay out by the fire. Tomorrow, if you are feeling better, we can discuss what comes next. I told you I would work to repay your kindness, and I told you we could discuss that later. For now, focus on healing." Zartha studied him across the table, trying to understand this human who defied everything she had been taught to expect. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. "You must know that helping me could bring you trouble. Your neighbors clearly want nothing to do with me. If they knew you had taken me in, they might turn against you as well." Quinlan shrugged. "Let them. I did not move here to win popularity contests. I moved here to live according to my own principles, and one of those principles is that I help people who need help, regardless of what species they happen to be. You are a strange man, Quinlan Larson. I have been told that before." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "But I think perhaps you are a strange orc as well, Zartha. You could have attacked any of those houses if you were truly desperate. You could have taken what you needed by force. But instead, you knocked politely and asked for help, even knowing you would likely be refused." "I am not a monster," Zartha said quietly. "I never have been, though your people seem convinced that all orcs are." "I am not convinced," Quinlan said, "and that is what matters in this house." She finished her meal in silence, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or the food settling into her chest. When she was done, Quinlan retrieved a bedroll from a closet and laid it out on the floor near the hearth, adding a pillow and a thick blanket. "Sleep," he said. "You are safe here." Zartha lay down on the bedroll, and despite her long ingrained wariness, despite the strangeness of being in a human dwelling, despite everything that had happened to bring her to this point, she felt her eyes grow heavy almost immediately. The warmth of the fire, the fullness in her belly, and the simple comfort of being somewhere she was not actively threatened all combined to pull her toward sleep. Just before she drifted off, she heard Quinlan moving around the cottage, banking the fire and extinguishing the lamps. She heard him settle onto his own bed across the room, and then she heard his voice, soft in the darkness. "Rest well, Zartha. Tomorrow is a new day." She wanted to respond, but sleep claimed her before she could form the words. She woke to the smell of cooking and the pale light of early morning filtering through the cottage windows. For a moment, Zartha was disoriented, her instincts screaming danger before her mind caught up and reminded her where she was. She sat up carefully, testing the injury in her side. It still hurt, but the pain was less sharp than it had been the night before, more of a deep ache than the stabbing agony that had accompanied each movement. Quinlan stood at the hearth, stirring something in a pot that hung over the fire. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard her moving. "Good morning, how do you feel?" "Better," Zartha said. "Sore, but better." "That is good. I made porridge with honey and dried fruit. Nothing fancy, but it will give you strength." He ladled the porridge into 2 bowls and brought them to the table. They ate together as morning light grew stronger, and Zartha found herself studying her host more carefully in the daylight. He had a kind face, she decided, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though there was also a certain sadness in his expression, a weight he carried that she could not quite identify. "I should change your bandage," Quinlan said when they had finished eating. "We need to check the wound and make sure the infection is not spreading." Zartha stood and lifted the side of her tunic to expose the bandaged area. Quinlan unwrapped the cloth carefully, and she saw him nod with satisfaction when he examined the stitches. "It looks better already. The swelling has gone down and I do not see any red streaks, which is a good sign." He applied fresh poultice and rewrapped the wound with clean bandages. "You are healing well. Orcs must have stronger constitutions than humans." "We do," Zartha confirmed. "We heal faster and resist disease better. It is one of the few advantages we have over your kind. Along with your strength, I would imagine." "Yes. An average orc is perhaps twice as strong as an average human, but strength does not matter much against organized armies with superior weapons and tactics." Quinlan finished securing the bandage and stepped back. "No, I suppose it does not." He hesitated, then added, "I need to go into town today. I have trading to do, supplies to purchase. You should stay here and rest." Zartha felt a flash of concern. "Will they question you? Ask why you need extra supplies?" "Perhaps. But I often buy in bulk, so it should not raise too much suspicion. Still, it would be best if you remained out of sight. The people here are not cruel by nature, but they are afraid, and fear makes people do things they might otherwise regret." "I understand. I will stay inside." Quinlan gathered a basket and a purse of coins, then paused at the door. "There is more food in the pantry if you get hungry, books on the shelves if you read. Make yourself comfortable, and I will return by midday." After he left, Zartha found herself alone in the cottage for the first time. She moved slowly around the space, examining it more carefully now that she had the opportunity. The books surprised her most. There were dozens of them, on subjects ranging from agriculture and animal husbandry to philosophy and poetry. She pulled one down at random and found it was a collection of essays on ethics and morality. She could read human languages, a skill she had learned from her mother, who had believed that understanding one's enemies was the first step toward surviving them. She settled into the chair by the fire and began to read, losing herself in arguments about duty and compassion and the nature of justice. The author seemed to believe that all rational beings had an obligation to treat each other with respect and dignity, regardless of their differences. It was a beautiful idea, Zartha thought, even if the reality of the world fell far short of such ideals. The hours passed quietly. She changed position occasionally to keep her injury from stiffening, and at one point she ate some bread and cheese from the pantry. But mostly she read and thought, and allowed herself to simply exist without fear or urgency for the first time in months. Quinlan returned just after noon, as promised, carrying a full basket of supplies and wearing an expression that was carefully neutral. He set the basket on the table and began unpacking it, pulling out flour, salt, sugar, dried beans, and various other staples. "Any trouble?" Zartha asked. "Nothing serious. A few questions about why I was buying more than usual, but I said I was planning to do some preserving and canning before winter. They seemed to accept that." He glanced at her. "There was talk in town, though, about the orc who came through yesterday evening." "What kind of talk?" "Some people are frightened. They want to organize a search party to make sure you have left the area. Others think you might return with more of your kind to attack the town." He said this calmly, as though reporting the weather. One man suggested posting guards on the roads. Zartha felt her chest tighten. "I should leave. I do not want to bring trouble to your door, Quinlan. You are not healed enough to travel safely, and where would you go?" He met her eyes. "Stay at least until you are stronger. We will figure out the rest as we go." "You are risking much for a stranger." "Perhaps. But I think you would do the same if our positions were reversed." She was not sure that was true, but she appreciated his faith in her nonetheless. "Very well. I will stay a few more days, until the wound has healed enough that I can travel without risk of it reopening." Over the following days, they fell into an easy routine. Quinlan tended his garden and animals in the mornings while Zartha rested inside, reading and recovering her strength. In the afternoons, he would check her wound and change the bandages, and they would share meals and conversation. Zartha found herself looking forward to these talks more than she would have expected. Quinlan was curious about orc culture and customs, but his questions never felt intrusive or judgmental. He genuinely wanted to understand her people, to see them as more than the monsters his society had made them out to be. In turn, Zartha asked him about his life, his family, the choices that had brought him to this isolated cottage. She learned that his mother had died when he was young, and his father had raised him alone while working as a physician. She learned that Quinlan had always felt like an outsider in his own community, too thoughtful and questioning for the rigid social hierarchies of his hometown. She learned that he had come here seeking not just peace but purpose, a way to live that felt authentic and meaningful. "I think we are alike in some ways," Zartha said one evening as they sat by the fire after dinner. "Both of us seeking a place where we can simply be ourselves without having to apologize for it." "Yes," Quinlan agreed, "though you have paid a much higher price for it than I have." "Prices are not always counted in the same currency. You lost your home by choice, but you still lost it. That is its own kind of pain." They were quiet for a while, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Then Quinlan said, "What will you do, Zartha, after you heal and leave here?" "Do you have a destination in mind?" "I do not know. I had heard rumors of orc settlements far to the north, beyond the mountains, where the human expansion has not yet reached. I thought perhaps I might go there, see if I could find a new clan to take me in." "That is a long and dangerous journey, especially alone." "I am aware. But what other option do I have? I cannot stay here in human lands where every door is closed to me." "Not every door," Quinlan said quietly. Zartha looked at him, trying to read his expression in the firelight. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that you do not have to leave. You could stay here with me if you wanted to." Her breath caught. "That is impossible. The town would never accept it." "The town does not have to accept it. They already leave me alone most of the time." "We could manage the two of us. I have enough land to support two people, especially with your help. You said you were a gatherer and healer. Those are valuable skills. We could work together, build a life together." He paused, then added, "Not as strangers. As friends, at least. Perhaps more if time and circumstance allow." Zartha felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "You barely know me, Quinlan, and I barely know you. How can you make such an offer?" "I know enough. I know you are kind and brave and principled. I know you value honesty and hard work. I know I feel more at ease with you after a week than I have felt with anyone in years." He met her gaze steadily. "And I know that turning you out to face the wilderness alone when there is an alternative would be both cruel and foolish. People would talk. They would condemn you for harboring an orc. Let them talk. I stopped caring about their opinions a long time ago." Zartha wanted to say yes. The word was right there on her tongue, sweet and tempting, but she forced herself to think rationally, to consider the implications. "What you are suggesting could destroy your life here. They might drive you out, or worse. And what kind of life would it be, always hiding, always looking over our shoulders?" "I am not suggesting we hide," Quinlan said. "I am suggesting we live openly and let the world adjust. It will not be easy, I know that, but nothing worthwhile ever is." She shook her head, though it pained her to do so. "I cannot accept, Quinlan, not yet. Give me time to think, to heal fully. Let us see how things develop. If the town discovers I am here and causes trouble, you must promise me you will not sacrifice everything for my sake." "I cannot promise that," Quinlan said, "but I will respect your need for time." The conversation hung between them for the rest of the evening, charged with possibility and uncertainty. When they finally retired to their respective beds, Zartha lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with her thoughts. She had spent so long alone, so long fighting just to survive, that the idea of having a home again, of having someone who cared whether she lived or died, seemed almost too good to be true. And things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But Quinlan's offer had not felt like a trick or a trap. It had felt genuine, offered freely with no expectation of anything in return except her company and her contribution to their shared life. Could she really accept such a gift? Did she dare? Sleep claimed her before she found an answer. The next morning dawned gray and threatening, with heavy clouds rolling in from the west and the smell of rain on the wind. Quinlan rose early and set about preparing for the storm, securing shutters and bringing in firewood. Zartha helped where she could, testing the limits of her healing body and finding that she was stronger each day, the wound pulling less with each movement. They were stacking the last of the wood by the hearth when they heard the sound of horses approaching. Quinlan went to the window and looked out, his expression darkening. "Riders from town," he said. "4 of them." Zartha felt ice flood her veins. "They have come for me." "We do not know that yet." But his tone suggested he suspected otherwise. There was a loud pounding on the door, aggressive and demanding. Quinlan waited a moment, composing himself, and then opened it. 4 men stood outside, all of them armed with swords and wearing grim expressions. Zartha recognized the stance of soldiers or militia, men comfortable with violence and authority. "Quinlan Larson," the lead man said, "we need to speak with you." "About what, Marcus?" "About the orc that passed through town last week. We have been conducting searches, making sure the creature has moved on. Your cottage is the last place we need to check." "I assure you there is no orc here," Quinlan said calmly. "I have seen nothing unusual." Marcus looked unconvinced. "Then you will not mind if we take a look around?" "Actually, I would mind. This is my property and you have no authority to search it without cause. The safety of the town is cause enough." Marcus tried to look past Quinlan into the cottage, but Quinlan shifted to block his view. "I have told you there is nothing to find." "That should be sufficient." "Maybe it should be, but it is not." Marcus's hand moved to the hilt of his sword. "Step aside, Larson. We are coming in whether you cooperate or not." Zartha made a decision in that moment. She could hide, let Quinlan face this confrontation alone, possibly see him hurt or worse in her defense. Or she could step forward and take responsibility for her own presence. It was not really a choice at all. She moved to the door and stood beside Quinlan, meeting the eyes of the 4 armed men without flinching. "I am here," she said. "I am the orc you are looking for." The men stepped back instinctively, hands going to weapons. Marcus stared at her with a mixture of shock and anger. "What is this, Larson? You have been harboring this creature." "I have been hosting a guest who needed help," Quinlan said, his voice hard. "And I will thank you to refer to her with respect." "Respect for an orc," Marcus spat on the ground. "You have lost your mind. These things are monsters, enemies. They have killed our people." "And we have killed hers," Quinlan shot back. "That does not give us the right to deny basic decency." Another of the men spoke up. "The law says any orc found in human territory can be detained or killed on sight." "You are harboring a criminal, Larson." "The law is unjust," Quinlan said flatly, "and I will not follow unjust laws." Marcus drew his sword. "Then you are a traitor to your own kind. Step aside and let us take the orc, or we will consider you an enemy as well." Quinlan did not move. "You will have to go through me." Zartha grabbed his arm. "No, Quinlan, do not do this. I will go with them. You have done enough." "I am not letting them take you," Quinlan said. He looked at Marcus. "She has done nothing wrong. She came here injured and seeking help, which I provided." "That is not a crime." "It is treason," Marcus said. "Last chance, Larson. Step aside." What happened next occurred so quickly that Zartha barely had time to process it. Marcus moved forward, sword raised, clearly intending to push past Quinlan by force. Quinlan grabbed a heavy walking stick that leaned against the wall beside the door and brought it up to block the blade. The 2 weapons met with a crack of wood on steel, and then Quinlan was moving, spinning the stick and slamming it into Marcus's wrist. The sword fell from the man's suddenly nerveless fingers. The other 3 men rushed forward, but Zartha was faster. She stepped in front of Quinlan, her hands up in a defensive posture, and caught the first man's sword arm, twisting it with her superior strength until he cried out and dropped his weapon. She swept his legs out from under him and turned to face the next attacker, her body moving on pure instinct, years of survival training taking over. The fight was brief and brutal. Quinlan held his own with the walking stick, using reach and speed to keep one opponent at bay while Zartha dealt with the other 2. She did not kill anyone, did not even seriously injure them, but she made it very clear that they were outmatched. Within minutes, all 4 men were on the ground, disarmed and groaning. Marcus looked up at her with pure hatred in his eyes. "You will regret this, both of you. The whole town will know what you have done. You will be marked as traitors and orc sympathizers. You will have nowhere to go, no one to turn to." "We will manage," Quinlan said coldly. "Now get off my property before I decide to let Zartha finish what you started." The men scrambled to their feet and retreated to their horses, gathering their weapons as they went. Marcus pointed a shaking finger at Quinlan. "This is not over, Larson, not by a long shot." They rode off at speed, leaving Quinlan and Zartha standing in the doorway as the first drops of rain began to fall. Quinlan closed the door and leaned against it, his breath coming hard. "Well," he said, "I suppose that settles the question of whether you can stay here." "What do you mean?" "I mean we are both outcasts now. We might as well be outcasts together." He looked at her, and despite everything, there was a hint of a smile on his face. "Welcome home, Zartha." She did not know whether to laugh or cry, so she did neither. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "Thank you." The rain fell harder, drumming on the roof and windows as the storm settled in. Quinlan moved to the fire and added more wood, building up the heat against the damp cold seeping in from outside. Zartha joined him, and they sat together in silence for a long time, processing what had just happened and what it meant for their future. "They will come back," Zartha said finally. "Probably with more men. We may have won this confrontation, but we cannot win a sustained campaign." "No," Quinlan agreed. "We cannot hold this cottage against a determined force, but I do not think it will come to that." "Why not?" "Because Marcus is a bully and a coward at heart. He came here expecting easy compliance or an easy fight. We showed him neither. He will go back to town and tell his story, and people will talk and rage and make threats. But actually organizing a force to come back here, to risk more injuries or even deaths, that takes more commitment than most people are willing to give." He looked at her. "We may be shunned and isolated, but I do not think we will be actively attacked, not unless we give them cause. You are betting our lives on that assessment." "Yes, but I think it is a good bet." Zartha wanted to argue, but she found she trusted his judgment. He had lived among these people longer than she had, understood their psychology and their limits. If he believed they could weather this storm, she would believe it too. The rain continued all day and into the night, a steady downpour that turned the roads to mud and made travel impossible. They spent the time preparing, taking stock of their supplies and discussing what they would need if they truly were going to make a life here together. Quinlan had enough food stored to last through the winter, and his garden and animals could provide most of what they needed going forward. Zartha offered her skills as a healer and gatherer, her knowledge of wild plants and herbs that could supplement their stores and provide medicines. As evening fell and they prepared dinner together, Zartha found herself marveling at how natural this felt, how right. She had spent so long alone, and before that, she had been part of a clan where everyone had their roles and duties but few had true companionship. This was different. This was partnership. Two people choosing to build something together not out of obligation, but out of genuine care and respect. They ate by firelight, the storm raging outside creating a sense of isolation and intimacy. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared away, Quinlan brought out a bottle of wine, something he had been saving for a special occasion. "I think surviving a militia attack qualifies," he said with a wry smile. They drank the wine slowly, savoring it, and talked about everything and nothing. Quinlan told her stories from his childhood, memories of his father teaching him to read and write, to think critically and question assumptions. Zartha told him about her mother, who had been a gatherer like her, and her father, who had been a craftsman known throughout their clan for his skill with wood and leather. "They would have liked you," Zartha said. "My parents. They always believed that different peoples could find common ground if they tried." "I hope I would have lived up to their expectations," Quinlan said. He hesitated, then added, "I need to tell you something, Zartha, something I should have said before." "What is it?" "When I offered for you to stay here, I meant it as friends and companions. I did not want you to think I expected anything else, anything more, simply because you would be living in my home. But I also need to be honest with you about my feelings." Zartha's heart began to beat faster. "What feelings?" "I am attracted to you, not in spite of the fact that you are an orc, but including that fact. I find you strong and intelligent and beautiful, and I care about you more than I have cared about anyone in a very long time." He met her eyes. "I am not saying this to pressure you or to demand any kind of response. I just needed you to know, so there are no secrets between us." Zartha sat very still, absorbing his words. Beautiful. He had called her beautiful. No one had ever called her that before. Orcs did not think in those terms, valued strength and skill over aesthetics. And humans certainly did not see orcs as beautiful. They saw them as monsters, as ugly and brutal and wrong. But Quinlan was looking at her as though she were precious, his gray eyes soft and sincere, and she realized with a start that she felt the same way about him. "I am attracted to you as well," she said quietly. "I did not want to admit it, even to myself, because it seemed impossible. Humans and orcs do not come together in that way. It is taboo for both our peoples. Many things that are taboo are only taboo because people fear change," Quinlan said. "But we are already breaking so many rules simply by existing in the same space with respect and care. What is one more?" "It is not just one more, it is everything. If we pursue this, we are choosing a path that will make us permanent outsiders to both our peoples. We will never fit in anywhere except with each other. I know, and I am willing to accept that if you are." Zartha thought about her clan, destroyed and scattered. She thought about the human town that had rejected her at every door except one. She thought about the life she had been living, always running, always alone, always just trying to survive. And then she thought about what Quinlan was offering, a partnership built on honesty and trust, a home where she would be valued not despite who she was but because of it. "I am willing," she said. Quinlan smiled, and it transformed his whole face, made him look younger and lighter. "Then we will figure out the rest as we go." He stood and held out his hand to her. Zartha took it, his skin warm against her palm, and let him pull her to her feet. They stood very close, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, could see the pulse beating in his throat. "May I kiss you?" Quinlan asked. "Yes," Zartha whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and tentative, a question more than a demand. She kissed him back, her small tusks careful not to catch on his skin, and felt something inside her that had been locked tight for years begin to open. They broke apart after a moment, both breathing a little harder, and Quinlan rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he said. "Not as a guest or a refugee, but as my partner. Help me build a life here, and let me help you build one too." "Yes," Zartha said. "Yes, I will stay." They stood together in the firelight while the storm raged outside. Two people who should have been enemies choosing instead to be something new, something the world had never seen before. And in that moment, Zartha felt something she had not felt in longer than she could remember. She felt hope. The weeks that followed were not easy, but they were good. True to Quinlan's prediction, the town did not mount another attack, but they did make their displeasure known. When Quinlan went to trade, he was met with cold shoulders and inflated prices. Some merchants refused to deal with him entirely. But enough of them were pragmatic enough to value coin over prejudice, and he managed to acquire what they needed, though it cost more and took longer. Zartha did not go into town at all. She stayed on the property, working in the garden, tending the animals and exploring the surrounding woods for useful plants and herbs. She found mushrooms that could be dried for winter, roots that could be ground into flour, and leaves that made excellent poultices for various ailments. She brought her findings to Quinlan, and together they began building a stockpile that would see them through the difficult months ahead. At night, they would sit by the fire and talk, sharing stories and dreams and fears. They learned each other's rhythms, the small habits and quirks that made them individuals. Zartha discovered that Quinlan hummed while he worked and had a terrible singing voice that he unleashed anyway, when he thought she was not listening. Quinlan learned that Zartha was meticulous about keeping her tusks clean and polished, a small vanity she had maintained even through the worst of her troubles, and that she had a dry sense of humor that emerged once she felt comfortable enough to let it show. They grew closer with each passing day, not just physically, but emotionally. They learned to read each other's moods, to offer comfort when it was needed and space when that was necessary instead. They learned to work together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs and actions as though they had been partners for years rather than weeks. And they learned to love each other, though neither of them spoke the word aloud for a long time. It felt too big, too dangerous, as though naming it might somehow break the fragile thing they were building. But it was there in every touch, every smile, every quiet moment of companionship. Zartha's wound healed completely, leaving only a thin scar along her side. She regained her full strength, and then some, the regular meals and relative safety allowing her body to recover from the long months of deprivation and stress. She felt stronger than she had in years, both physically and emotionally. One evening in late autumn, as they were preparing the garden for winter, Quinlan paused in his work and looked at her. "I have been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About making this official. Not in the eyes of the town or any authority, but between us. A commitment, a promise that we are choosing this life together permanently." Zartha set down the spade she had been using. "What are you suggesting? A hand fasting, perhaps, or whatever the orcish equivalent is." "Some ceremony or ritual that marks this as a true partnership, not just a temporary arrangement." "Orcs do not have formal marriage ceremonies," Zartha said. "We simply declare our commitment to the clan, and if both parties agree, they are considered bonded. But the clan provides witnesses and support. We have none of that." "Then we will create our own tradition," Quinlan said. "Something that honors both our backgrounds but belongs only to us." They spent the next week planning their ceremony. They chose a date at the new moon, a time of endings and beginnings. They would exchange vows in the clearing behind the cottage, where the forest met the garden, a liminal space between wild and cultivated, much like their own lives. The night of the new moon arrived clear and cold, with stars blazing overhead in a sky unmarred by clouds. They built a small fire in the clearing and stood facing each other, hands joined, with no witnesses except the night and the trees. Quinlan spoke first. "I, Quinlan Larson, choose you, Zartha, as my partner in this life. I promise to stand with you against whatever comes, to honor your strength and support your weakness, to offer my loyalty and my love without reservation. I see you not as other but as equal, and I am grateful every day that you chose to stay." Zartha felt tears prick her eyes, though she did not let them fall. "I, Zartha, choose you, Quinlan Larson, as my partner in this life. I promise to share your burdens and celebrate your joys, to bring my strength to our shared purpose, to offer my trust and my heart without fear. You gave me shelter when no one else would, and you gave me hope when I thought it lost. I am honored to build a future with you." They had no rings, but Quinlan had braided cords from leather and woven them with threads of silver and green, colors that represented both of them. He tied one around Zartha's wrist, and she tied the matching cord around his. They would wear these cords always, a visible reminder of their commitment. They sealed the vows with a kiss, longer and deeper than any they had shared before, and when they broke apart, they were both smiling. They were bonded now, married in their own way, and it did not matter that no authority recognized their union or that both their peoples would condemn it. They had chosen each other, and that was enough. Winter settled over the land in earnest after that, bringing snow and ice and long dark nights. Quinlan and Zartha spent most of their time inside, keeping the fire burning and working on various projects to pass the time. Quinlan taught Zartha to read and write in human script with greater fluency, and she taught him some of the Orcish language, which had a harsh guttural sound that he struggled to master. They laughed together at his mispronunciations and her occasional confusion over human idioms. They also grew more intimate physically, learning each other's bodies with the same patience and care they had brought to learning each other's minds. There was awkwardness at first, both of them navigating the differences between human and orc anatomy. But they approached it with humor and communication, always checking in, always making sure they were both comfortable and consenting. What emerged was a physical connection that felt as deep and meaningful as their emotional bond. Pleasure and trust intertwined into something neither of them had experienced before. On the longest night of winter, they lay together in the narrow bed, wrapped in blankets and each other, watching the firelight dance on the ceiling. "Are you happy?" Quinlan asked quietly. "Yes," Zartha said without hesitation. "Happier than I ever thought I could be. You, the same. I spent so many years looking for purpose and meaning, and I found it in the last place I expected. In an injured orc on your doorstep. In you," he corrected. "Just you." She kissed him, slow and sweet, and they made love again as the fire burned low and the snow fell silently outside. Winter gave way to spring gradually, the snow melting to reveal the first green shoots pushing up through the earth. Quinlan and Zartha began preparing the garden for planting, turning the soil and planning what crops they would grow. They had saved seeds from the previous year, and Zartha had gathered others from the forest plants she had found, unusual varieties that could provide food and medicine. They had been working in the garden one morning when they saw riders approaching from the direction of town. Zartha tensed, her hand moving instinctively to the knife she kept at her belt, but Quinlan touched her arm gently. "Wait," he said. "Let us see what they want." There were 3 riders this time, and to their surprise, one of them was a woman. They reined in their horses at the edge of the property, and the woman dismounted first. She was middle-aged, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors. She approached carefully, her hands visible and empty. "Quinlan Larson," she called. "May I speak with you?" Quinlan walked forward, Zartha close behind him. "You may. Who are you?" "My name is Helen Porter. I am a farmer from the other side of town. I have come to ask for your help." "My help?" Quinlan sounded surprised. "I was under the impression the town wanted nothing to do with me." "Most of them still do not," Helen said honestly. "But some of us are more pragmatic. I understand your companion has knowledge of healing and herb lore." "She does," Quinlan said cautiously. Helen looked at Zartha directly for the first time, and though there was wariness in her eyes, there was no hatred. "My daughter is ill. She has a fever that will not break, and the town physician has done everything he can. He says there is nothing more to be done, that we should prepare for the worst. But I am not ready to give up on her. I heard rumors that you," she nodded to Zartha, "might be able to help." Zartha felt the weight of the request settle on her shoulders. This was a test, she knew, not just of her skills but of whether a human could trust an orc with something as precious as a child's life. If she succeeded, it might begin to change minds. If she failed, it would confirm every prejudice the town held. "I can try," Zartha said. "But I will need to see the girl to know what we are dealing with, and I will need access to my supplies." "I can bring her here," Helen said quickly. "If you would rather not come to town." "That would be better," Quinlan agreed. "Bring her this afternoon. We will do what we can." Helen nodded gratefully and remounted her horse. The three riders departed at speed, and Zartha turned to Quinlan. "This could be a trap," she said. "It could be, but I do not think so." That woman was desperate, and desperation makes people do things they would normally consider unthinkable, like asking an orc for help. "If I fail, if the child dies, they will blame me." "Yes, they probably will. But if you succeed, it might open doors we thought were closed forever." He took her hand. "I will not force you to do this. The choice is yours." Zartha thought about the child she had never met, sick and possibly dying, and about a mother who loved her enough to overcome her fear and prejudice to seek help from an enemy. She thought about the healer she had been before the war scattered her clan, the satisfaction she had found in helping others. "I will try to help her," Zartha said. "It is what I was trained to do." They spent the intervening hours preparing. Zartha gathered her herbs and tools, laying them out and checking each one. She had Quinlan build up the fire and boil water, preparing clean cloths and a space where she could work. When Helen returned in the late afternoon, she had her daughter wrapped in blankets and cradled in her arms. The girl could not have been more than 7 or 8, her face flushed with fever and her breathing labored. Helen carried her into the cottage and laid her on the bed at Zartha's direction. "Her name is Lily," Helen said, her voice breaking slightly. "She is my only child." Zartha examined the girl carefully, noting the high fever, the rapid pulse, the slight swelling of the lymph nodes in her neck. She checked Lily's throat and saw the telltale white patches that indicated an infection. It was serious but not hopeless, not if treated quickly. "This is a throat infection," Zartha said. "It has spread but not yet reached the critical stage. I can treat it, but she will need to stay here for several days so I can monitor her progress." Helen hesitated. "I do not know if I can leave her." "You do not have to. You can stay as well, though we do not have much space." "I will stay," Helen said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Zartha began the treatment immediately. She brewed a strong tea from willow bark and other herbs to bring down the fever, adding honey to make it palatable. She made a poultice of crushed garlic and other antimicrobial plants and applied it to Lily's throat and chest. Every few hours, she would give the girl more tea, adjusting the mixture based on how she responded. Quinlan gave up his bed for Lily and Helen, making pallets on the floor for himself and Zartha. They took turns staying awake to monitor the girl's condition, ensuring she drank enough fluids and changing the poultices regularly. For 2 days, Lily's fever raged, and Helen sat beside her daughter with hollow eyes and clasped hands, praying to whatever god she believed in. Zartha worked tirelessly, never leaving the girl's side for more than a few minutes, adjusting treatments, trying different combinations of herbs, doing everything her training and instinct told her to do. On the 3rd day, the fever finally broke. Lily opened her eyes and asked for water in a weak but clear voice, and Helen burst into tears of relief. Zartha continued the treatments for several more days to ensure the infection was fully cleared, but she knew the worst had passed. When Helen finally prepared to take her daughter home, she stood before Zartha with tears still wet on her cheeks. "Thank you," she said. "You saved her life. I will never forget this, and I will make sure others know what you did." "I did what any healer would do," Zartha said. "Perhaps. But you did it when no one else could, and you did it for people who have treated you with nothing but contempt." Helen reached out and clasped Zartha's hand, human skin against green orcish skin, a gesture of gratitude and connection. "I was wrong about your people. We were all wrong." After they left, Zartha sat down heavily in the chair by the fire, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Quinlan brought her water and food and sat beside her. "You did an amazing thing," he said. "I did my job, nothing more. It was more than that, and you know it. You showed them that orcs are not monsters, that your people have value and skill and compassion. One mind changed is the beginning of many, or it is just one woman who will be shouted down by the others." "Have a little faith," Quinlan said gently. "Change has to start somewhere." He was right, as it turned out. Word of what Zartha had done spread through the town, and while many still refused to accept it, some began to reconsider their positions. A few weeks after Lily's recovery, another person came seeking help, a man with a badly infected wound on his leg that the town physician had said would require amputation. Zartha examined him, cleaned and treated the wound with her herbal remedies, and saved his leg. He left singing her praises. Others followed. Not a flood, but a trickle, people desperate enough or open-minded enough to seek help from the orc healer who lived with Quinlan Larson at the edge of town. Zartha treated them all with the same care and skill, never asking for payment beyond basic supplies or food, simply doing what she had been trained to do. Slowly, grudgingly, the town began to change its attitude. They still did not welcome Zartha with open arms, still kept their distance and muttered their concerns, but they stopped actively shunning her and Quinlan. Merchants began to trade with them again on fair terms. People nodded greetings when they passed on the road rather than turning away. It was not acceptance, not really, but it was tolerance, and that was more than they had dared hope for. Spring turned to summer and the garden flourished under their care. They harvested vegetables and herbs, preserved what they could for winter, and traded the surplus for other goods they needed. Their life settled into a comfortable rhythm, work and rest and companionship blending together into something that felt whole and satisfying. One evening in late summer, they sat outside the cottage watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Zartha leaned against Quinlan's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body and the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could have this," she said quietly. "A home. A partner. A life beyond mere survival." "Neither did I," Quinlan admitted. "I thought I would grow old alone here, content but never truly happy, and then you walked into my life and changed everything. You changed everything for me too. You gave me back my purpose, my ability to heal and help others, and you gave me love when I thought such a thing was impossible between our peoples." "Love is never impossible," Quinlan said. "Difficult sometimes, dangerous often, but never impossible if both people are willing to fight for it. We have fought, Zartha agreed, and we have won in our own way. Not just won. We have built something new, something that did not exist before, a bridge between two worlds, small and fragile perhaps, but real. Zartha turned to look at him, seeing the love and pride in his gray eyes. I want to spend the rest of my life building that bridge with you, she said. However long that may be. I want that too, Quinlan said. He kissed her, soft and lingering, and they sat together as the stars began to appear overhead. Two people who should have been enemies but chose instead to be family. The months continued to pass, and their life together deepened and grew richer. They talked about the future, about possibilities they had not dared consider before. Could they eventually have children? It was not clear if such a thing was even possible between human and orc, but the idea was not as impossible as it once seemed. Could they expand their home, perhaps build a larger structure that could serve as a proper healing house where Zartha could treat patients more effectively? Could they reach out to other outcasts and refugees, offering shelter and support to those who had nowhere else to turn? These were dreams, nothing more, but dreams were important. They gave shape to the future, provided something to work toward beyond mere day-to-day survival. It was early autumn when Helen came to visit again, this time with her daughter Lily in tow. The girl had grown taller and stronger in the months since her illness, her cheeks rosy with health. She ran to Zartha the moment she saw her and threw her arms around the orc woman's waist. "Thank you for saving me," Lily said, her voice muffled against Zartha's tunic. Zartha felt something warm and overwhelming bloom in her chest. She awkwardly patted the girl's back, unused to such displays of affection from humans, especially human children. "You are welcome, little one." Helen smiled at the sight. "Lily has been asking to visit for weeks. She wanted to bring you something." She handed Zartha a basket covered with a cloth. "We baked bread and made preserves. It is not much, but it is made with gratitude." "It is more than enough," Zartha said, touched by the gesture. They spent the afternoon together, sharing food and conversation. Lily peppered Zartha with questions about orcs and their culture, her curiosity innocent and genuine. Zartha found herself telling stories about her clan, about the customs and traditions she had been raised with, things she had not spoken of in months because it hurt too much to remember what was lost. But talking about it now, with this human child listening with wide eyes and genuine interest, felt like a different kind of healing. It was a way of keeping her people's memory alive, of ensuring that someone beyond herself would know that orcs were more than the monsters humans had made them out to be. When Helen and Lily finally left, Zartha stood in the doorway waving goodbye until they disappeared from sight. Quinlan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You were good with her," he said. "She was easy to be good with. She sees me as a person, not a monster. That is because she has no prejudices to unlearn. She only knows you as the healer who saved her life. I wish more people could see the world the way children do, before hatred and fear are taught to them." "Some do," Quinlan said, "and we are helping to create a world where more will. It is slow work, but it is important work." Zartha turned in his arms to face him. "I love you," she said. It was not the first time she had said it, but each time felt significant, a conscious choice to affirm what they had built together. "I love you too," Quinlan said. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." They went back inside as the evening grew cool, and Zartha felt a contentment settle over her that was profound and complete. She had walked into this town alone, desperate and injured, expecting nothing but rejection. And she had found rejection, door after door closing in her face, until she reached the very end and found the one door that opened. That door had led her to Quinlan and through him, to a life she had never dared imagine. She had found home, not just a physical place but a sense of belonging, of being valued and cherished for exactly who she was. She had found purpose, using her skills to heal and help others, to slowly change minds and hearts through action rather than words. And she had found love, deep and true and transformative, the kind of love that made the world feel full of possibility despite all its hardships. As winter approached once more, they prepared together, stocking supplies and fortifying the cottage against the cold. They had survived one winter together and would survive many more, side by side, partners in every sense of the word. On a quiet evening as the first snow began to fall, they sat by the fire with Zartha reading aloud from one of Quinlan's books while he worked on mending a tear in one of their blankets. It was a perfectly ordinary moment, domestic and peaceful, and yet it felt precious precisely because of its ordinariness. This was what they had fought for, this simple right to exist together without fear or persecution, to build a life based on mutual respect and affection rather than the arbitrary divisions their respective societies had tried to impose. They had not changed the entire world, had not ended the conflicts between humans and orcs or eliminated prejudice and hatred. But they had changed their own small corner of the world, created a space where those divisions did not matter, and that was enough. Zartha finished the chapter she was reading and closed the book. Quinlan set aside his mending and held out his hand to her. She took it, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn and listening to the wind howl outside. "You ever regret it?" Quinlan asked after a while. "Staying here, choosing this life with me over trying to find your people?" Zartha considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "I miss my clan, miss the sense of belonging to something larger than myself. But they are gone, scattered or dead, and no amount of wishing will bring them back. What I have here, what we have built together, is real and present and good. I would not trade it for anything. Even though it means being an outcast to both our peoples, even then. I would rather be an outcast with you than accepted anywhere else without you." Quinlan squeezed her hand. "I feel the same way." They retired to bed shortly after, and as Zartha drifted off to sleep in Quinlan's arms, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. It had been long and painful, full of loss and hardship, but it had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life. And she was grateful for all of it, even the painful parts, because they had shaped her into someone who could recognize and appreciate the gift she had been given. She had walked into a human town alone, and every door had shut except one at the very end. But that one open door had been enough. It had been everything. The years that followed brought their own challenges and joys. The town's tolerance of Zartha never quite became full acceptance, but it grew into something approaching respect. Her skills as a healer became known throughout the region, and people traveled from distant settlements to seek her help. She treated them all with the same care, human and orc alike, on the rare occasions when other orcs passed through the area and heard of her presence. Quinlan expanded their cottage, adding a room that could serve as a proper healing space with a bed for patients and storage for Zartha's ever-growing collection of herbs and medicines. They worked side by side, their partnership strengthening with each passing season, their love deepening into something solid and enduring. They never had children of their own, whether due to the biological incompatibility between their species or simple chance. They never knew. But they became surrogate parents to many of the children in the area, especially those who were outcasts or misfits themselves. Lily remained a frequent visitor, and as she grew older, she began learning healing arts from Zartha, becoming the first human apprentice to an orc healer. Other young people followed, drawn by curiosity or genuine calling, and Zartha found herself teaching the next generation, passing on knowledge that might otherwise have been lost with the scattering of her clan. It was not the life she had imagined for herself in her youth, but it was a good life, a meaningful one, and she embraced it fully. Quinlan's hair began to gray at the temples as the years passed, and lines appeared around his eyes and mouth, marks of a life well lived. Zartha aged more slowly, her orcish constitution meaning she would likely outlive her human partner by decades. They did not speak of it often, but the knowledge was always there, a bittersweet reminder that their time together, however precious, was finite. But they did not let that shadow darken their days. They chose instead to focus on the present, on the work they were doing and the life they were building. They chose joy where they could find it and faced sorrow when it came with courage and mutual support. One spring morning, many years after Zartha had first walked into town, she stood in the garden watching Quinlan work with several young apprentices who had come to learn about medicinal plants. His movements were slower than they once had been, his hair now more gray than dark, but his enthusiasm for teaching was undiminished. He caught her watching and smiled, that same warm smile that had greeted her all those years ago when she was desperate and injured and alone. She smiled back, feeling the weight of their history together, all the moments of triumph and struggle, of laughter and tears, of ordinary days and extraordinary ones. They had built something beautiful, something that would outlast them both in the form of the knowledge they passed on and the minds they had changed. The orc woman had walked into the human town alone, and every door had shut except one at the very end. But that one open door had been enough to change everything, not just for her but for everyone whose life she touched afterward. It had been the beginning of something new, a bridge between worlds built on compassion and courage and love. And as Zartha stood in the garden she had helped plant and tend for so many years, surrounded by the evidence of the life she and Quinlan had created together, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. She had chosen hope over despair, connection over isolation, love over fear. She had chosen well, and she would choose the same again every single time.